Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Arijit. I lead the Medical Affairs Organization for Polymedicure. Thank you all, first of all, for logging into this session on the pre-analytical quality, importance of skilled workforce in the laboratory. So today, as we know, that pre-analytical area is error prone. From 46%, it's reported from 46% up to 68% of the errors happen in the pre-analytical phase. So let's today hear from Dr. Anita Singh, who is amongst us to talk more around this area and how a skilled workforce can address many of these um, the issues around this pre-analytical errors. So I'll quickly introduce the speaker today. She is Dr. Anita Singh. So Dr. Anita Singh is a pathologist by training and is currently working as a senior director at Healthcare Sector Skill Council. In her prior assignment, she was the Associate Director of Medical Affairs for Central and South Asia for BD Life Sciences in the Pre-Analytical Systems Division. In her career, she had the opportunity to meet experts and engage with laboratories in India, Singapore, Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Korea, and Australia and New Zealand. She has also volunteered for labs for LIFE program in India and was BD fellow for PIFAR Cambodia project for initial assessments and also phlebotomy master training program. Prior to her corporate experience, she has practiced pathology for more than 12 years and was consultant pathologist and quality control in charge of an NABL accredited laboratory in India. She has attended and presented in national and international conference in the region very widely. So we welcome you, Dr. Anita. But before we ask you to move to your presentation, we would also like to apprise the group a bit about Polymedicure. So Polymedicure happens to be India's one of the leading medical device manufacturers and exporters in India, with a very dominant position in the medical consumables market. So in terms of revenue, we are more than 100 million in turnover across different verticals, both in the domestic as well as international. We have over 125 medical devices that are marketed worldwide. We have over 215 patents, and our footprints are present in more than 110 countries. And from a capacity point of view, Polymedicure is producing more than 3 million medical devices per day. In terms of manufacturing, we have 8 manufacturing plants in India and abroad. In India, we have 5 manufacturing plants, and in abroad, we have 3. We have more than 40 to 50,000 healthcare professional reach on an annual basis. And we have been awarded the largest exporter of consumable medical devices in India since the last 8 years. The last happened to be winning the India Medical Device Company of the Year in 2018. And last year, we were acknowledged to be the top 25 industrial innovative company of the year. So those are the credentials that Polymedicure has gained over the last few years, and it has moving very rapidly towards maintaining this position and becoming a dominant player in the consumable space. So with that, we also wanted to say that this group that we have today is a mixed group of laboratory physicians. So we have doctors in the as participants, we have laboratory technicians, and we have phlebotomists alongside with Polymedicure employees also. So while Dr. Singh would be presenting, you would also find in your webinar tool that there is a Q&A section in which you can register your queries, and possibly towards the end of the session, we'll open up for the question and answer discussion, and then we'll pick up those queries from the Q&A section. So that's the flow that we are looking at. And maybe over to you, Dr. Anita, for your presentation.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everyone. At the onset, I would like to thank, Sulagna, Kadrul, and of course, Dr. Arijit for actually inviting me for this session. And a special thanks to all the participants. I think post-lunch is a difficult session to attend, but you all have taken out time, and I know how hectic it is for the labs today. So as Arijit has told, please feel free to ask questions and we'll see if we can give you answers. There might be questions where we don't have answers right now, but we promise that we'll get back to you with the answers in time to come. So as I start, the topic that I have chosen is pre-analytical quality, importance of skilled healthcare workforce in laboratory. Slightly shift, you'll say I'm not straight away talking about pre-analytical errors because in my current working, I'm working in the skilling sector. And what I've realized is that we talk of a good product, we talk of, good workforce. And as you understand in today's scenario, there is a difference and clear cut, importance to competence, because there is a difference between a qualification and a competence. So a person might be qualified, might be having a certificate, but at times the person is not competent enough to do the job, and therefore it automatically leads to errors and challenges in the pre-analytical phase. So I will be covering that. Before I start, the things that I'll take you through are introduction to my organization, pre-analytical quality, what are the things that we need to do, pre-analytical errors and some of the best practices. I will talk about some of the guidelines and what are their suggestions. Then skilled manpower, why training is important, and what are some of the specific things that we actually need to take care of when we are training so that it is effective and makes a difference, and how you can associate with my organization where I'm working. If you feel I'm fast, you can let me know by raising a hand and I'll go slow. So Healthcare Sector Skill Council, as the organization that I'm working in, it is an organization under the ambit of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. So it's basically an organization that was constituted by CII, NSDC, which is the National Skill Development Corporation, leading healthcare providers, which has AIIMS, pharmaceutical companies, medical device organizations and associations, both public and private. So it's an organization that has representation in the governing council. The governing council chairman is Dr. Naresh Trehan, but we have representation with both public and private organizations. We are notified by Government of India as a non-statutory certifying body. So the principal idea of this council was to create, good quality vocational education and skill development in the healthcare space. So what do we do? If you see the tree, so predominantly it is around skilling, reskilling and upskilling. So that might involve modern medicine, allied health, healthcare management. We also have a subsector as Ayush now. So we are developing job roles around Ayush, nursing, as well as social work. So these are some of the areas that we work in. What is our mandate? So we develop national occupational standards. So since you people are from the lab domain, what are national occupational standards? So these are, standards which talk about a particular job role, what the person needs to do in the job, what should be the content for his, you can say a model curriculum for his training, how long should be the training, what is the requirement of a lab, skill lab where the person will get trained. It also covers the, qualifications of the assessor also. So if you see in our domain, we have roles like phlebotomist. So if you know, a few years back, phlebotomist was not a job role. Now it is an identified job role. So we have job roles like phlebotomist. Then what do? We have training partners because we don't give training ourselves. So there are multiple training partners across India which are affiliated to us. So there is nothing affiliated to us means like there is a clear cut set criteria. Everything happens online. So if you want to go, you can go and visit the websites. There is a site which is called as Skill India Portal. So everything is online on Skill India Portal. So the center, applies for affiliation. They apply, there's a physical audit. And if they comply to all the, guidelines, then they get affiliated. The training courses are being run. Once the training batch or training for a particular batch is finished, they tell us to, to do the assessments. We assess them. It's mostly online. The practical only happens face to face. And once they get, assessed and they score more than 70%, because in skilling ecosystem, generally you have to secure around more than 70% marks. When you score more than 70%, you get certified. So that is one component. What we also work in, something I don't know if you have heard of, that is called RPL, which is recognition of prior learning. So see, what happens is, and you all would have experienced that at times in our laboratories or in other setups, we have people who have learned the art or the skill on job, but they are not certified. So maybe there is a person who's working in the lab, making slides, doing some work, but he's not been certified. So there what happens is the organization can identify the gap. They have to apply for RPL. There what happens is they give the assessment on the same which a normal phlebotomist would give. And if they secure 70%, they get certified. So it's good for them. Once the organization will have certified candidates. Secondly, those certified candidates will feel pride in what they are doing, and they have opportunities to even leave that organization and go to the other organization and grow in their career. Then there is apprenticeship. I'm not going into detail. If you want, you can go onto the websites. Apprenticeship was earlier not in healthcare sector. It has been introduced to service sector in some, just some time back. And there are organizations which are doing apprenticeship. Then job aggregation and placement support. We have our own placement portal so that the people who are getting skilled and trained, they actually register. The organizations also register and the candidates also register. And then we facilitate the placement. So we do Rozgar Melas, we do job fairs, we do campus placement drives, so that the people who are getting trained, because that's the key task for us, because if we are conducting trainings, if we are facilitating, then those candidates need to get employed. So that's something which is very, very important for us. There's something to highlight to you what we have done in Mission COVID. You can visit our website. So we have created multiple posters. There is a very good learning tool which is called in our HSCC Mission COVID. So you can go to the learning tool. It is free. You can register yourself. Then there are a number of courses, like this is the content which is being covered. So like you talk about coronavirus, the risk factors, everything is there, like investigations, best practices, quarantine, isolation. Once you go through the content, there is an assessment. If you are able to get 70% and above in the assessment, then also you get a certificate that is auto-generated. So you can leverage that. We have also developed a very good animation video, which is being released in public interest. That is already there on YouTube as well as on website. You can easily share it. You can share it with your family. You can share it in your societies. You can share it in your organizations. It is a very good sensitization video, because what we realized is that in fighting corona, it's more about awareness and making people understand the sensitivities so that the spread can be contained and people could be disease free. So you can always do that. Now coming to pre-analytical quality, the key topic and what you all from the domain actually belong. So when we talk of pre-analytical quality, what are we concerned with? See, the biggest challenge, or you can say the need of the hour, is that we want results which are accurate, which are reliable, and which are timely given. For that, you need a competent and a motivated staff. The key challenge is you might train them, you might do everything, but you can't retain them at times. So retaining a skilled healthcare professional is also very, very important. And therefore, when I say it's very, very important, because we have to see what are we providing to those skilled force. Do they have opportunities in the organization? Do they feel pride in what they're doing? Are they happy? So we'll have to work around those domains and see what best we can do so that, they are retained in the organization and can, help you grow as an organization, as an institution. So most important thing I can say when we talk of pre-analytical quality is you cannot manage what you cannot measure. So the important thing is that you need to have variables, you need to have processes where you are measuring your errors, where you are doing a quantification. Because whenever you do a quantification and you measure the errors, then only you can say that, okay, where I was in the baseline, I have taken some actions and I have improved. Or maybe it's not working and we are having more errors. So measurement is very, very important. Now coming to how can we do that? So basically we take support of quality indicators. We define some quality indicators. We work around those quality indicators and see that our processes are developed. So what is important? So as a team, as an organization, first you have to make, I can say, a line diagram of how the process flows in your organization. And I would say, I've always say it is a journey of a sample. So if it is a laboratory, you need to check like, how does my sample move inside my laboratory? Which are the areas, which are the gray areas where you think that there can be problems? Because see, I'll tell you, in my experience for all these years, I can say it's more than 20 years now working in the lab or outside the lab. At times you do not have to spend a lot of money to bring up quality. It is only that you understand the process, bring about changes. And I'll give you, and I'll keep sharing examples of what I've learned through my journey, that how people had done it. And it was not a big investment. So in this case, I'll share with you, because what needs to be measured is important. How to collect data, how you will collect data, like whatever the process happens. Then what is the acceptability limit? How you will decide that, okay, today my double prick ratio is, I'm just giving an example. So my double prick ratio is this much. What is the level that you find that, okay, if it is more than this, it is alarming. If it is less than this, it is okay, because it might happen in some cases. Then laboratory, area where there needs to be done, because see, if you go all over, at times it doesn't work. So you might have to identify a few high risk areas or high priority areas in your organization. And then you can start working that, okay, I need to lift these practices up, and then I will take care of the other things. Then who would be responsible? Because it is no man's land. So somebody has to, because, it normally happens that there are duties which are, timed, maybe 6 hours, 8 hours, their rotation duties. So you have to, within your team, maybe train few people and make them responsible for actually collecting the data, because it has to be unbiased. So I'll share a very small example. So where we had a lab audit tool, and we prepared a self-assessment checklist in that. So we said, okay, we'll do it. We go on this account and we do it once. And then, later on a 6 monthly basis, the account could do a self-assessment. And what we found? The self-assessment was always better. So at times, you tend to, just not pick those things up when you're doing it yourself. So who would be responsible for? Generally, it is that you identify people who are not from the same department. So, and they have a checklist and they work. So who will be responsible? And how will the data be reviewed? As I said, you have to define your, acceptable limits. You have to define what duration you will map, with what interval of duration you're going to measure it. That is very, very important. And this, I'm giving you a small example. I was working in a laboratory, and what happened was that it's a very simple thing. They had kept a diary. They had kept a diary in the area which was, in between where all the instruments were there. And the idea was that every day, if any person, starting from the reception to a person who was doing home collection, to any of the technicians, if you face any problem, you write in that. So initially when I joined, I thought that, it's why is it that important? But when I worked there, I realized it helped us bringing a lot of improvement. Because, sometimes what happens is you face a problem, you might crib and, okay, you might go and, have a chat with your colleague and say, okay, this I faced today. Please see that it doesn't happen the next time. Maybe you too do it, but it might happen with somebody else. But what happens is when people are writing that in a diary, and every day when people used to write, the lab in charge or the quality managers who were assigned, they would go read it, try to understand what the problem was. And every day there was a meeting at 2. So whatever was written today was discussed in the next day, and the corrective actions were taken. So like these were the things which we picked up, and they took corrective actions, and they were followed after a month and so, to understand if that works. So that is something we can always do, and it is really very, very helpful. So similarly, when I'm talking, like, it's very, very important. What is your request form? So how is the request form? The primary sample collection manual, which is normally prepared at, most of the labs, does it cover everything which is required? Then the traceability of the primary sample, which can be identified, or you can say, tagged to the patient where it was collected. Then monitoring of the samples in the transport. recording of the receipt of samples, processing of urgent samples. Then again, urgent samples is a big issue. So how you do it. So I will share one of the articles which has come from Singapore, and I read it, and they are actually doing it the same way which we were doing many years before. Tagging samples. So we had fluorescent stickers, and we used to tag the fluorescent the sample with that fluorescent sticker, and also the requisition slip. So when the tray with 50, 100 samples used to come to the main lab, everybody knew that these samples were urgent. So there are systems in LMS where you can identify urgent samples. So it depends on the lab, how they feel it is good for them, they should adopt, because that's very, very important. And the policies of sample rejection, like which sample will you reject? What is the criteria? Because then it's also, this links to the risk factor. Because one day I was presenting and we are saying risk, when we talk of risk factors, because risk identification is something which is very, very important. And these days, is part of 15189. So basically what happens is, if the sample is not, because team has to identify what is high risk and what is low risk. Because if sample which is not labeled is at low risk than a sample which is wrongly labeled. So then you have to decide in the laboratory, like what is the rejection criteria? If you reject, what process needs to follow? So these are some of the things which are very key as quality indicators. Now coming to pre-analytical phase, Arijit has already, shared like number of errors that we have. What we need to identify very importantly is that if you see the three, phases of the lab, the pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical, we spend around 60% of our time in the pre-analytical phase. And that's the phase where maximum errors happen. Because see, what happens is, whatever we say ours is an automated lab, ours is a lab which is biphasic, mechanism is there, or ours is a lab where we're using barcodes. But let's accept that, there is large number of manual intervention that happens in the pre-analytical phase. So maybe, ordering of test, identification, sample collection, transportation, and centrifugation. So these are some of the key things, or you can say key steps, which we do in the pre-analytical phase. And because of a lot of manual interventions, the errors do occur. We have to work to see that we reduce the percentage of errors. But saying that zero error is something which is slightly non-realistic. So I can give you a small example. When I was working in the laboratory, there was a sample which was collected from a patient. It was fasting and PP sample. Both was home collection. So naturally when the samples came, they came together. The person who got the samples did not label them. So since they were home collections, barcodes were done in the laboratory. So when they came, the barcodes were done. When I was authenticating the report, I found that the fasting blood sugar was more than the PP sugar. It normally also can happen. There could be circumstances when this happens. But generally, I asked my technician, why the fasting is coming more. He said, no, we did the quality control for sugar in the morning. It's perfectly fine, ma'am. It's okay. I said, never mind, you get me the tubes. You won't believe, when I got the tubes and I just pulled the barcode up, they had actually wrongly labeled, because my machine would not identify fasting or PP. It will do a blood sugar. And what happens was, the fasting and PP had the same names. Only it was like one had written F, the other was PP. So we realized, and it was a learning, that we have to train the people again who are labeling, because there are errors happening. So even if we say it is a barcoded lab, ours was a, we are using barcodes and everything, it only is too mechanical when it gets into the analytical phase, but still it is there in the pre-analytical phase. There is manual intervention at times, and therefore there are errors. So we need to work around and see, how we can improve. Now in this slide, there's a very good article by Plebani, and I will encourage all of you to read it. I hope you all now must be realizing that the pre-analytical phase has been clearly divided into two. One is the pre-analytical phase, and the other is the true pre-analytical phase. And why this has happened? Because, at times the blood sample collection or the identification or the test request and the preparation is not happening in the laboratory. Maybe it's a home collection, it's a collection center, or in a big hospital, it is not happening in the lab. So lab to own up that process and to, actually say that, they have a control of it, actually becomes difficult. So pre-analytical phases, which includes your test request, your patient and sample identification and sample collection. So this part is very, very risky. The true pre-analytical is where, you know, where you prepare the sample and it is being ready to be put into the analyzer. So pre-analytical phase is something which we need to concentrate more. Now coming to pre-analytical, when we talk of errors, we have to talk about the variables. So there are two types of variables. One is physiological, the other is non-physiological. See, physiological is if a patient is pregnant, they write a test, their reports are slightly deranged. When a patient will take that report to the clinician understands that some things could be changed because of the physiological condition of the patient. But non-physiological are the ones which are under our control, because major component is how you collect and label. So that's why it is very, very important that we control the part which is actually under our control. In various errors, there are three key components that come out. So one is the patient condition, which I said could be physiological or any other, the sample collection method that we are doing, and the personnel, the person who's actually taking the sample or taking care of the pre-analytical phase. Is the person competent enough to do the job that he or she is doing, is very, very important. So there are various type of samples that you might collect, and there are various type of, you know, prerequisite patient preparations that are required in some of the samples. Like a very simple thing is urine collection. So we both are doctors at our home, and if my mother-in-law goes to an hospital and they ask her to collect a midstream urine, I don't think she understands what's a midstream urine is. So my only point is, even being educated from the family, at times people do not know. So training to your staff to understand and tell them that they have to explain what a midstream urine is, because otherwise that sample report might not be reflective of the actually what you want to see in the sample. So these are some of the things which we have to be very sensitive about, you know, when we are articulating, interacting with the patients and doing a sample collection. Now, variables could be appropriateness of test request. I think this is a big subject in itself, because now it's being studied and talked a lot about, because sometimes what happens is that what test is written is not exactly the test what is required. At times it might happen. Or maybe it is illegitimate, you cannot read it. So when the patient comes to the lab, what is entered is not exactly reflective of what was requested. So then it becomes very, very critical. So I can give you small examples. Even, you know, training your reception staff, if you are a laboratory, training your staff and owning that they understand what tests they are entering is very, very critical at times. If they, suppose if a patient comes for a pregnancy test and they enter male, because see, the point is at times it is just a typo error. It's not a typo error. At times it is not a good reflection to the lab, and it's not right, because and somebody has to check, because at times it can go missed. So what is the process, how you are following that things are getting checked? Are we training our reception staff again and again, and specifically for tests which sound similar when somebody is speaking? Because at times a person might come and articulate. So when, what are they talking? Are they talking what you're entering? Is also at times very, like sometimes you can have patients, suppose coming for PSA, and they enter, in case of male, they enter a female. The patient comes for the report, it's not a good reflection. So at times, all these things become very, very important. Then proper patient identification and preparation. Patient identification is very, very critical. We need to have two clear patient identifiers. And specifically, if you go with CLSI, I will be mentioning it at times. Some of you would have already read. If others have not, please go on the websites. These documents are actually copyrighted. You might have to buy. So it is Clinical Lab Standards Institute. They are very important guidelines. They keep coming up, they get updated, and they talk about the best practices. You can refer to them when you're making your standard operating procedures of your laboratory or an institute. So as per CLSI guidelines, ideally you have to label it in front of the patient or label the tube after. So this is again very controversial, because, you know, when I used to present and talk at labs, they used to say that, no, we can't ask them to do it afterwards. You know, at times they might leave it unlabeled or whatever. So my only request is prepare an SOP for your organizations, train your staff. Either it has to be before or after. I have done audits where it is personal preference. That doesn't work. That is not the process. Either you are doing before or you are doing after. Whichever way you are doing, you have to double check when the patient comes, clear two identifiers that the organization defines, because you might have people with similar names. Secondly, very important thing, you have, in case if you're doing before, I've discussed it many times, you might label 6 tubes, maybe, or 7 tubes, or 4 tubes, or 2 tubes, but you might at times not be able to collect sample in all the tubes or whatever was requested. It's a difficult draw. What will you do with the other labeled tubes? So all this needs to be defined, because you can't leave those labeled tubes on the table, can be picked up for any other patient. So what do you do if you have tubes which are left, which were labeled, but sample could not be collected? So all this becomes very, very important. So accurate sample collection is again, that is the whichever process you follow. It's not that it's an EDTA 2 ml tube and we collect 1 ml because we just have to do hemoglobin. Because any brand tubes, vacuum, non-vacuum, the additive is as per the fill volume of the tube. So if it is a 2 ml tube, the additive will be that is required for a 2 ml collection. If it is 3 ml, it will be required for a 3 ml collection. So you have to do. But what important you need to refer, again, the CLSI guidelines come in here, that plus minus 10% in case of evacuated tubes, plus minus 10% is acceptable. Because definitely till the time when the tube gets manufactured until you are collecting the sample, there will be some loss of vacuum. So plus minus 10% is acceptable. You can always show those guidelines to your auditors or anybody who's coming and discussing. That's important. Then handling and transport to the laboratory. This is also very, very important, like how you are handling the sample, because even centrifugation seems very simple process, but it is very, very important, because how you're centrifuging. Is your RPMs and all calibrated to the diameter of your centrifuge? Because what happens is we just measure the fill volumes and we keep them, whichever additive. Maybe it's not required the same speed, the same time. So you have to consult your manufacturer's guidelines and then centrifuge the samples at a particular RPM. You have to come to that G-force, measure your radius. There's a formula where you can put that and you can calculate. So that's very, very important. And similarly, then how you are transporting, what is the temperature, how you're keeping the tube, specifically when you're even sending them in a pneumatic chute or otherwise transporting. How are they kept? They are shaking, because that all leads to hemolysis and could have a lot of issues in the testing process. There's a very good article you all can refer to. This is by Plebani, and actually it talks about harmonization of quality indicators in laboratory medicine. There's a preliminary consensus. I've not gone into detail of the article, just referring for you or people to go through it. It was something which a working group were formulated under IFCC. And so they have divided the 3 departments of the laboratory into pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical. And they have identified what are the key causes of errors in all the 3 phases. Then they have also given a priority index to them, like which is more critical than the other. So like 4, 3, 2, 1, they have prioritized, and then they have even given how you measure it. So that's very, very important, because what they have assured is that you need quality for the complete testing process. So if pre-analytical, the right test choice at the right time on the right patient, analytical is right results in the right form, post-analytical is right interpretation with the right advice as to what next to be done with the results. That's very critical. So if you see all those, variables that they have defined, one of the very important is the competence of the staff. So allied health professional education is an important component of the institute quality program, and the learning objectives need to be defined. So this is also covered in that article, and it is being one of the variables or a quality indicator. So it's very good article. Please go through it. You will have number of points to go through that and implement that in your laboratory as you develop your SOPs. So in that only, if you see on the left hand side, there are number of you can see there are number of quality indicators which they measure. What I have picked up is the 11 key ones for the pre-analytical phase. So if the ones that are highlighted yellow are the ones which are in the high order in the priority, like inappropriate test request, unintelligible request, and inappropriate time of sample collection is something which they have categorized over misidentification errors, test transcription errors, incorrect sample, incomplete fill, sample clotted, unsuitable sample for transportation, contaminated and hemolyzed samples. So this is how they have done the variables. It's a good article. You can, actually go through it and prepare your quality indicators. Now coming to the pre-analytical best practices. So there are a number of articles that you can refer to. For sample collection, please go through GP 41 7th edition. That's a CLSI guideline that was released, I think 2.5 to 3 years back. It has been updated. It has been updated from the earlier venous sample collection guidelines that we used to follow. There it is in much more detail. Some things have been covered, some things have been changed, and they have added quality control and everything, as well as training component in the new guideline. So one is ensure test quality, requisition validity. As I said, it is very, very important what test has been requested, what preparation needs to be done for that particular test. That's very important. Minimize trauma to the patient. That's very, very important part of the pre-analytical phase. So you might find that's why talking always helps. And I said that means you can't be automated every time. You need to talk and interact with the patient. At times the patient will tell you, last time when I fainted. So you have to decide, will you make him sit on a phlebotomy chair, or the patient needs to, lie down and give this sample, because that helps, because some people have that tendency. Or so just talk to them, understand, so that, you're minimizing that trauma to the patient. At times when you see that the patient is not very cooperative, please seek help from your colleague or ask the attendants, whichever attendant available, so that there is no more movement of the patient, which is jerky and might lead to injury. Then minimize potential for phlebotomist injury. So that's also again important when you're finding, patients which are not very cooperative. Please see that you do not injure yourself. Secondly, where is the sharp container? Sometimes I have visited, audited labs where you'll find a very beautiful phlebotomy chamber, all touch, and you'll find things done very well. But when you ask where is the sharp container, it is right on the opposite corner of the room, and the person has to hand carry the sharp to do the disposal. So it has to be an arm's length. So please see that you have all that provision there, which is helping your phlebotomist to reduce that injury. So where is the sharp container? Does he have gloves and other consumables available? Because they have to be well-fitting gloves and other requisites that are required. So please see that there is no injury to the phlebotomist. Then vein selection, as I said, you have to see what all tests you need to do, how much blood you require. Please look out for veins. You know that medunocubital is the preferred one, but see that whichever one is, because it might vary from patient to patient, which is more visible. But then you have to see that will you be able to collect that much blood? Do you want a straight needle? Do you want a needle or syringe? Or do you want a wing set? What do you want to use? So make that choice so that you are able to collect the amount of blood that is required. Then site cleaning. Historically, I have been training that, and we did train that center out is the way. Center out is the way when you do the cleaning. But if you go through the GP 41 7th edition, the new CLSL guideline, or you can say, I would not say new, or is the latest, the last guideline that has come up. In that, what they have told is they have articles to support where even the up-down motion is equally effective. So even if it is center down or it is up down, it has to be done in the right way, so that the site is clean before you do a prick. So that's very, very important. Then tourniquet application site, where you tying the tourniquet, it has to be 4 fingers up, so wherever you're trying to prick. Then don't tie the tourniquet too tight or too loose. Then how long? It's just less than 1 minute. So if you're not able to draw, you'll have to release it and then again tie it up. So that's very important. Now coming to order of draw. Order of draw, as you see on my slides, the order of draw is the ones that is defined by the CLSI guideline. What is important is, are you doing an open collection or a closed collection? So whichever way you are doing, the order of draw in the closed collection will be exactly the way it is here. If it is an open collection and you are transferring the sample into the evacuated tube, this is the WHO, WHO guideline that I have just put a screenshot here, because then it talks about you need to have a tray. They have to be in the same sequence as you do for the closed collection, and you have to just put the needle in. You don't have to press, because that leads to hemolysis. Then people have their different type of experiences. They say, no, it doesn't go, it doesn't flow. So please check if it is possible. Otherwise, if you're doing an open collection, you can always, there is no vacuum, but then it has to go from the side of the tube. Try not to push the sample, because that may lead to hemolysis. Then something which is very, very important is the wing set collection and a discard tube. See, if you're doing a close collection and you're using a wing set means any needle that has a long wing. So then again, it depends on the manufacturer that you're using and the length of that wing. So that is the dead space. So if and that is more important when you're collecting a coagulation sample. So if you're collecting a coagulation sample and you are using a wing set and you do not use a discard tube, what will happen? That, that amount of air in that, so maybe it is the length of the tube is 7 inches, 14 inches, whatever is the manufacturer. So that much amount of air is going to get neutralized, and your 9:1 ratio will not be 9:1 in your coagulation sample. So you can realize what will happen. Your reports will not be reflective of the patient's clinical condition. So that's why it is very, very important when you're using a wing set, try to use a discard tube. Discard tube, it's not you have to fill the discard tube till the blood starts flowing in the discard tube, so that the dead space in that wing set has been taken care of, and then you can collect the sample. Processing, I've already told you that, how you transport, how you centrifuge. Please, have those guidelines defined when you have to prepare a platelet pool plasma. How much long, at what speed your centrifuge needs to run has to be defined. There has to be an SOP, or it has to be pasted where the team is doing. So it's not, I want to go early, I'll increase the speed, and things will get separated. It will. So I can share a small example. You all would have heard of, slight clots or, red cell hang-ups or whatever in the tubes. See, at times what happens is that, so when I was working in the laboratory, what I noticed was when you start collecting samples, you have a tray, when it gets filled, it goes inside. So realize what happens is the first sample which is kept in the tray might get 30 minutes or whatever is your clotting time for that sample to clot. But till it moves on to the last sample, maybe the last sample is not getting that much time to clot. So I'm not saying people are doing it. I'm saying it is important for you to sensitize that once that tray goes inside where the centrifugation has to be done, they need to be taken care of. You define the process so that the last sample also gets enough time to clot. Otherwise, what will happen is you feel that there is clotting, but the clotting is still going on. We might centrifuge the sample, you will get some plasma, but the latent fibrin formation is happening. So when that tube is kept into an analyzer, there might be that latent fibrin that might actually block the probe of the analyzer, and maybe it's a succession because the problem is with the analyzer, the reports getting delayed, impacting the patient results. So it's very, very important that you give them enough time to clot so that the clotting process is complete before your centrifuge and you take out the serum. Then again, storage is again very, very important. At times you might not be doing the same test, every day. So it's very, very important how you're storing. At times I've gone and done audits where they had very good fridges, refrigerators, they had very good labeling structure, but I found the red top tubes were being stored. See, if you're keeping the red top tubes and storing the sample in the same tube, then what is happening? Your serum and your clotted cells are in contact throughout the time. That is spoiling the quality of the sample. So if you go through CLSI guidelines, again, in CLSI guidelines, the serum or the plasma from the cells or the clot need to be separated within 2 hours of collection. On a routine, when it is coagulation testing, there are again CLSI guidelines that if it is PT, it is APTT or other tests, they need to be done, even before, within 30 minutes, and there are different storage guidelines for them. So please see that they are being followed, documented in your SOPs, the staff is trained how to do it. Otherwise, it is not going, not going to be clearly reflecting actually the results that a clinician is expecting. As I said, transportation is very, very important. The timing, the separation of the samples, what temperature they are going, what containers, and there, as you would see on my right side of the slide, so there is a triple packaging system. Basically, if I'm not going into detail, you all must be knowing, but I want to highlight is that wherever there is a biohazard label, somebody has to wear gloves and to touch. So definitely where it has to be placed is important. Secondly, your requisition slips and your sample tubes cannot be together. So it's very, very important, because at times you'll find people are just wrapping that requisition around the tube, putting a rubber band and just sending to the lab. Please discourage this, advise, educate, because that's very, very important. We have to consider all samples to be infectious unless proved. So that's very, very important. Within how much time do I have? And then I'm just seeing the time, because I'll quickly go through that. How much time do I have?
We still have 15 more minutes now.
Okay, fine. Now coming to the skill, manpower, training and importance. As I said, it is very, very important that you have a skilled person doing it, because if you have best of the labs, but the person who are doing it is not competent enough to do, you will not get the same results. So I'll share an article again here, and you please all can go on the net and search it. So there was a article by Plebeni where basically they did a study in the laboratory and identified the errors. So they did it in the pre-analytical, analytical and post-analytical phase. Then they picked up what the errors are. They designed the corrective actions towards it. And I said, because when you do audit, when you have your own quality management system, it is very, very important. You first study your process, identify what the gray areas are, design a corrective action, measure it, and then review. Is it working or not working? So they did that. And you won't believe, after 10 years, they again did a study on pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical and compared the errors. The errors in all three phases had gone down as compared to what they did 10 years before. What was more important was that again, the pre-analytical errors in percentage was more as compared to analytical and post-analytical. But if you compare the pre-analytical errors, which were 10 years before, then with what is after 10 years, they had reduced. So any guesses, I mean, what do you think could have been the causes that led to that reduction in errors? It is very, very important to understand. So they came up with three key findings. One was, there was more commitment from the phlebotomist. Second, it was more following of the SOPs, because at times what happens is we study, different references, we design, things are designed, but not followed, not practiced on ground. So following the SOPs. And third most important was interdepartmental cooperation. That has actually led to reduction in errors. That is very important. See, what happens is, if there was a difficult draw, I say you are trying a venous sample, by accident you have an arterial sample. If that is being communicated, labeled, written to the lab inside, it immediately helps. At times you would have seen people say, oh, when it is a technician doing it, there are less errors. When we have nurses or other people doing it, there are more errors. It's nothing, there are more errors. See, the thing is, the person who's doing, if the same person is connected to the lab or might be going inside the lab and understanding what is happening, when you know what has happened, you are more sensitive about it. When you collect and give and you don't have any follow-up of what has happened to what was done, then your learning process or your sensitivity is not that much as compared to the others. So it is very, very important when you do, if there is a difficult draw, if there is a challenge, please write label, so that if it is immediate, the lab might be able to release 1 or 2 reports which are possible and help the patient, so that the treatment is not delayed and a repeat sample can be requested. So that's very, very important. So now coming to, skilling and again, one thing I forgot to tell you is that, as I was talking of CLSI guidelines, now you have a guideline by the name of GP48. It talks about only phlebotomy training. So it talks about how phlebotomy training needs to be done, what all needs to be covered, how it needs to be measured. So there is a complete guideline on phlebotomy training. So see how sensitive it is. Now, when I'm coming to skill training, it is not only learning a phlebotomy skill. See, what I'm trying to tell you is, when you learn a skill, even as a technician, even as a phlebotomist, it is important. But please remember that, upskilling is very, very important, and it is not a choice for us in today's scenario. The skill that you learn at the beginning of your career might not be required for the same job in future. When I did my MD pathology, quality control was not there. When I started practicing, quality control was almost there. So that's what I'm telling you. You have to evolve. Do not depend on your organization to train you. So you might be trained by the organization, lucky enough, but not. Please explore avenues where you can get trainings. There are a lot of things which are available online. try, learn them, because your skills need to upgrade. With the same skills, you cannot be relevant to the organization and you cannot grow professionally in your career. So that's something which is very, very important. What we have learned today should not be there where it is. It has to evolve if you want to grow. So first of all, it is very important for you to identify what is the gray area that, or the skill set that you need to learn. What you can learn faster. You know, everybody cannot learn everything. So you have to identify which is the area that I can learn and grow. So that's something which is very, very important in today's scenario, especially in this pandemic era. There is a lot of online trainings that have started, because, you know, we are not left with any other option. Classroom classes are not possible. So digital training, different learning approaches, and, you know, technologies that are complementing. Definitely in lab, you cannot do, you have to go to the lab, you have to test. But to implement that, to do that, there are a lot of, you know, avenues and trainings that are available. So please leverage them. In the training cycle, this is more for a person who's actually planning the training. You have to do a need assessment. You have to develop the content to conduct a training, and then you have to evaluate. See, try to understand, evaluation is very, very important. It's not putting somebody down. So I can give you an example. When I used to do it, what we used to do, we used to take a pre-test. We used to, suppose if you have 10 to 15 people in the class, what we used to do was, we used to give them numbers. We used to tell them, do not write the names, because people are not very comfortable about it. Some people may be seniors, some people may be juniors. They must be in the organization for a long time. So they don't feel comfortable of them getting low marks and their juniors seeing it. So what we used to do, we used to tell them, we used to give them a number, you put your number. So we used to take a pre-test, conduct a training session. And after the training session, we used to do a post-test. And again, with the numbers, you can easily, and I'm telling with my practical experience, we've done that. We have projected those histograms after the training, after 2 hours, half-day trainings, and you just have the numbers. So everybody sitting there knows their number and know how they have performed. And 100% I'll tell you, if it is properly, gap analysis has been done and the content is customized, 100% there will be an improvement in the learning if the people are concentrating in the class. So there are different methodologies you need to use so that the training is effective, but definitely, you know, there is an improvement and people feel good about it, and you can do that. So evaluation is very important. Whichever way you think is possible needs to be done. So this is the complete training cycle. You analyze, you plan, you develop, deliver, and you evaluate. Now, what is the need for training in our laboratory setup? One is orientation. When new people join in, there could be a new technology that you have introduced. Maybe there is a change in process you have introduced. Because coming in COVID times, I think social distancing, hand washing, sanitizing, even for that, you need training to your staff, because maybe they've heard and seen, but what is the protocol that you want to follow? Then a refresher training. You have to see that, you know, there are trainings at you know, regular intervals, so that people are, you know, abreast with the latest information and it keeps getting refreshed. If there is a new instrument, there is change in technology, or there is a process related change. Then role change. Maybe you get promoted. When you're moving from one post position to the other post, at times, even in the lab scenario, you will have to orient to new responsibilities. You have to develop new skills. So there can be, as I said, you could have an on-job training or it could be an off-the-job training. So there is some component you can always learn online, and there can be some component where a practical training, a skill setup, a skill station sort of can be formed and it can be done. Simple trainings, like even if you are in the lab, as per the guidelines, you need to know first aid. You need to, you know what are the emergencies that can happen. What will you do if there is a fire? So it's not about only technology by just drawing a sample or as a technician labeling it. There are other things that you need to learn in the job, and it's very, very important for the organization. So as I was talking about risk management, and you know, it's a very, very important component. In risk management also, because I'm not going into detail, there are labs where you need to categorize what risk is higher risk and what risk is lower risk, and how will it impact. But you see, even if you see this and you read articles, there are two things. One is operator capacity and one is op staffing. So one is you have short staffing, or you mean maybe the correct staffing is not there. Today, the hematology technician is on leave and biochemistry technician is basically replacing. So there is a risk. But more important is your training and competency. So important in risk is what can go wrong. We have to have clear identifiables. how can you prevent and detect it? And is it working? Because if you have designed some corrective actions or a policy, if something happens, you have to see that is it working or is it not working. That's very, very important. And training and continuous education is very important. You could have in-house classes. You can also take help from external sources which can come conduct training. I have learned that you might have regular internal classes, but at times when an outsider comes and trains and talks, it is more effective. People are more receptive because your face, your style of talking, they have heard every time. So when there's a new person coming in, it's at times is very, people, I know, I've seen that the people are very receptive and they hear, and maybe you have been telling them the same thing many times, is not heard of at times. So that's very important. Then there are very good articles. There was one article I've not, kept in my slides because of time. It was from GTB Hospital in Delhi only. And, they had said that, it is a good article a few years back, and they had used the latest technologies. So the idea is at times when you have a lot of errors, they say, oh, we are using the old, conventional method of sample collection. If we move into a better one, we might not have errors. So what they had showed is that actually it is not the technology that automatically will help. It is also the training component. If people have the new technology, but they are not trained how to use it, then again, you will have errors. Like I always talk when it comes to needle stick injury. So see, by using a safety engineered device, it is not that you will not have a needle stick injury. If you do not activate the safety engineered device at the right time, you still will have needle stick injury. So again, it's similar way. You have to sensitize your staff. I can share a very small story here. I was giving one presentation and I generally visit the phlebotomy room. So where there I had gone, I had seen that people were wearing gloves. Then they were removing the gloves. Then somebody comes in, they'll wear again and remove. So when I was presenting, I asked them, like, what's your criteria? What's your criteria? How do you decide that you have to wear gloves? Because definitely I know at times it's problematic. And when I visited, I've seen, people have taken their own innovations. You'll have one finger cut from the gloves to touch the venipuncture site. So there are all those innovations that people do. So they told me it's very simple. When you have a patient for an HIV test, they wear the gloves. When the patient is not for an HIV, they don't. I said, okay, fine. I'm a person who is an HIV, who is HIV positive, say for example, and I come for a hemoglobin test. Why I need to tell you? Suppose the patient doesn't tell you. So that's what I'm saying, sensitizing your staff that, maybe it is uncomfortable at times, it is difficult, but please do it because it's for your own safety. So training and reiterating is actually only bring change. So this is again a good article where they have found the hemolysis rate in the samples. So they took a small group of people and trained them on phlebotomy. And, then they got the samples collected. So they found that because of the standardized training, the hemolysis rate had gone down. Now they need to actually, on the article, they have said that they need to really work and see that it remains the same when even they have future studies or they have a bigger sample size. So what I'm trying to highlight here is that training, sensitizing people on best practices, working with them very closely, understanding what problems they are facing, sometimes it really helps, because so if I, like in my practical experience, what I used to see was that if you're wearing a glove and you touch your finger on isopropyl alcohol, it gives you a feeling of an ungloved hand on that finger. So at times some people used to do that, but the point is that be very clear that you are wearing gloves and you are not touching the site again after you have cleaned it. So that's very important, and do not take off that it's not comfortable, I need to take it off. And so training, learning is very, very important. So an important part of skilling also is that, you can't do a skilling in a classroom. So 50% of the time actually should be on a person to practice. So design, train them, take classrooms, but be very, very sure that, once you have done that, they also get time to practice. Like for first aid training, you cannot give in a classroom. You need to have skill stations. They have to practice how to give a CPR. They need to practice how they will do. So that's very important. Work with your teams, work with them, take some classroom classes, do role plays with them, ask them to do, very simple would be that, one of them, when you're doing a phlebotomy training, one of you can become a phlebotomist, the other can become a patient, and do a role play and let everybody observe. And after that, you can say what went right, what didn't go well. And there how you will know that, because at that also a very good start point. I normally used to do that. You're going for a training, check. So you will have an idea what they know, what they do not know. So instead of, covering everything in your slides, just pay attention to the part where you think that the people need more training or they are not sensitive about. That at times helps. Common mistakes. See, when you are doing a training, please see that you are repeating some things which are takeaway messages for those people who are attending the training. So they remember what is repeated. Stories make an impact. Give examples, talk about what happened with you, what you did, because they remember what they do. So make them practice. The content has to be simple, more visuals, images, and so doing one thing which is exciting or not exciting. An audience wants solutions, so talk to them, understand with them what problems they are facing, and try to give them solutions, because that's what they really want when you're doing a training session. Documentation again is very, very important, because it hasn't happened if it's not documented. So I'm not going in interest of time, but there are different ways how you can document, but it has to be documented. These are some of the resources which I just put in. So there are CLSI guidelines, as I said, GP41, which talks about the venous blood collection. There is WHO guideline on blood collection. There is a JCI hospital guideline. There is a laboratory quality management systems. This is a WHO and CDC guideline. Then there is a CLSI guideline, GP48, which talks about only phlebotomy training. Then there is QM12, which talks about the quality indicators. You can all go online. There is a website by Labs for Life. This was a project that was done by NACO, Ministry of Health. There are a lot of resources. There are videos, there are manuals available on the website, which can be downloaded or read. So this is a good resource that you can leverage. And I just, because of the slides, I just actually went there and I found that they had actually been running e-courses now. So you can always see that. There are two articles that I'm referring to in this COVID era, which I found on the net, which was very interesting. One is the one that is again by Lippy, and they are talking about the pre-analytical errors, the general ones and the specific. They have gone into detail. Good to read if you are, doing COVID testing in that. The second one is from a experience, which is from Singapore. They have also covered in great detail about the pre-analytical considerations. They are talking about, even in one of these articles I read about, they are talking of which sample collector is better, what are the benefits, and they are also talking about the challenges they faced and how they are doing it. So it is very good to learn from people who are already practicing. They have collected some data. We can refer to that and see if it's of any value to our practice. So this is all in my talk. Just one slide of how you can associate. So if you can associate as an organization or as an individual, you could be a subject matter expert, as a trainer, assessor, or you can have trainings with us by signing MOUs, or you can be assessors or be training centers. So I think this is all from my talk. Together, we all can bring a change. Definitely one person cannot. It's a team effort, which we have to be very important about. In any lab, it's not one person. It is a team that can bring a change. So it's different people, interpret this, saying in a different way. It's from a very famous poem, The Road Not Taken. So two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. See, the point is there are two paths. You can take any one which is normally taken, one which is not taken. What I want to highlight here is we have to have confidence in what we are doing. If you have confidence in what you are doing it right, then just don't worry, you will have success at the end. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anita, for that wonderful and comprehensive, presentation, and especially with those nuggets of experience, those anecdotes that you have given, especially to small nuances that are required in the laboratory. Often, and what my take-home message is that you stressed on the point that it's not the machine all the time, it's the man behind the machine which is many a times responsible for some of these errors. And it's important to be aware about those errors, where it has happened, and document them, and to take corrective actions and evaluate whether those corrective actions were appropriate or not. I think that's really. And also I had, while you were presenting, I taken notes of all these resources where one can update. In Polymedicure, we also do a lot of laboratory technician educational programs from time to time. Team who is present in this call will have benefited a lot from your talk, and I'm sure that all others would have benefited. There were a few questions, the few comments there that could this lecture had been in Hindi, then perhaps perhaps
You
but
could
the
have
language,
told me in
yes,
between. I am not very bad at Hindi. I could have covered few things. I can still answer questions if they have. I can answer in Hindi, no problem.
yes. So what I'll do, I'll just start posting one after the other. Maybe we can be taking those questions for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, definitely,
So
no problem.
one question was, how unsafe are phlebotomists during COVID sample collection?
So that is what I was telling, that you have to have the PPE with you. So there is no choice that you do not collect the sample without wearing a PPE. So again, PPE, again, that's what I said, training is very critical, because we all have never been, I mean, as a pathologist also, हम लोग हमेशा PPE नहीं पहनते थे, इतना ज्यादा PPE नहीं पहनते थे. अब ग्लव्स पहन लोगे, ज्यादा अपने मास्क लगा लोगे. बट अगर अब आप कोविड पेशेंट्स को हैंडल कर रहे हो, एंड स्पेसिफिकली इन दिस करंट सिनेरियो, एनी पर्सन हु इज हैविंग कॉफ एंड कोल्ड and coming for any sample collection cannot be taken very lightly to the lab until hence proved. So I think PPE is very important. आपको पहनना चाहिए, आपको रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहिए अपने ऑर्गेनाइजेशन से, और सेकेंडली आपको ये रिक्वेस्ट करना चाहिए कि हमको पहनना और उतारना सिखाइए, बिकॉज डोनिंग एंड डोफिंग ऑफ पीपी इज वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. मास्क है, हम लोग पहन लेते हैं, बट पीपल आप उसको नाक से टच करके ऊपर ले आ रहे हैं, नीचे से खींच रहे हैं. सो इट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, बिकॉज डेफिनेटली अगर आप लैब में काम कर रहे हैं, आपने मास्क लगाया, आप पानी भी पिएंगे, आप बीच में खाना भी खाएंगे, तो आपको कैसे मास्क उतारना है, फिर उसको कैसे पहनना है, हर बार यूज करने से पहले आपको हैंड सैनिटाइज करना है, ये सब बहुत जरूरी है. हैंड सैनिटाइजेशन के भी, बिकॉज आई डिड नॉट कवर दैट, इट वाज नॉट इन टाइम, बट डेफिनेटली कोशिश करिए कि सब जगह पोस्टर्स लगे हों. आप खुद प्रैक्टिस करिए कि आप क्या वो जो 7 स्टेप्स हैं उसको फॉलो कर रहे हैं, आप 20 सेकेंड्स एटलीस्ट अपने हाथ को क्लीन कर रहे हैं कि नहीं कर रहे हैं. चाहे आप सैनिटाइजर यूज कर रहे हैं, चाहे बेसिक बेटर है आप सोप वाटर यूज करिए, अगर आप किसी कंडीशन में सैनिटाइजर भी यूज कर रहे हैं. इवन ग्लव्स, अगर आप ग्लव्स भी पहन रहे हैं इन कंडीशंस में, आप ग्लव्स को कैसे उतार रहे हैं, तो देयर इज अ वे आपको ग्लव्स कैसे उतारना है. ऐसा नहीं कि ऐसे उतारा इधर से उतार लिया. सो देयर इज अ वे, लाइक आप एक हाथ से निकालेंगे, फिर उसको पकड़ेंगे, तब दूसरे हाथ से निकालेंगे, सो दैट उसकी जो आउटर सरफेस थी ग्लव्स की, वो आपको किसी भी तरह टच नहीं कर रही है. सो देयर इज अ वे आप कैसे करेंगे, आप उसको कहाँ डिस्कार्ड करेंगे. सो इट्स अ बिग प्रोसेस. सो मेरा रिक्वेस्ट है इस मतलब टॉक में, इफ देयर वर फ्रंट एंड पीपल, देयर कुड बी पीपल हु आर इन द एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लेवल, हमारे लिए बहुत जरूरी है कि हम उनको ट्रेन करें, बार बार ट्रेन करें, ऑब्जर्व करें, गलतियां वो फिर भी करेंगे, उनको फिर आगाह करें कि क्यों उनको करना जरूरी है, क्योंकि उनकी सेहत के लिए. और आई थिंक मोर इम्पोर्टेंट, मैं उस फैमिली में हूँ, लाइक मेरे हस्बैंड रोज हॉस्पिटल जाते हैं, तो मुझे लगता है फैमिली के लिए बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है इस कोविड एरा में. आप टेक्नीशियंस हैं, आप काम कर रहे हैं लैब्स में, आप पैथोलॉजिस्ट हैं, आप इन्फेक्टेड मटेरियल को डील करके फिर आप घर जा रहे हैं, तो बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है कि हम वर्क प्लेस हाइजीन की ट्रेनिंग दें, और ये भी ट्रेनिंग दें कि वो जब घर आएंगे तो क्या करेंगे. मतलब ऐसा नहीं कि वो घर पहुंचे उन्होंने सब कुछ छूना शुरू कर दिया. सो आई थिंक वो भी हमें इंटरनली कोशिश करनी चाहिए कि हम लैब्स में अपने स्टाफ को उसके लिए एजुकेट करें, सेंसिटाइज करें. सो आई थिंक इन सम पॉइंट इन टाइम हमारा ना अभी ऑनलाइन LMS पे स्टार्ट हो जाएगा. वी हैव क्रिएटेड ट्रेनिंग कंटेंट ऑफ वर्क प्लेस सेफ्टी एंड व्हाट वी नीड टू डू. स्पेसिफिकली करंट सिनेरियो में बिना मोबाइल के हम रह नहीं सकते हैं. सो आप मतलब आप लैब में काम कर रहे हैं, आप कितनी बार मोबाइल छू रहे हैं, कैसे कर रहे हैं, उसको कैसे फिर सैनिटाइज कर रहे हैं, आई थिंक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है.
Absolutely, and I'm sure that many of the people who are attending this session will log in to the HSSC website and find out those modules. There was another query, ma'am. Can you again explain the non-physiological and physiological, especially in the context of pre-analytical variable types?
Okay. So see what happens is जब भी प्री एनालिटिकल वेरिएबल्स की बात होती है तो दो तरह से डिवाइड कर देते हैं. मतलब वेरिएबल का मतलब क्या है कि जो क्लिनिशियन ने अपनी रिपोर्ट एक्सपेक्ट करी वो उसको नहीं मिली, ये वेरिएबल का मतलब हुआ. तो वो दो कारणों से हो सकती है. एक ये है कि पेशेंट को कोई फिजियोलॉजिकल कंडीशन है जिसके कारण उसकी रिपोर्ट में जो एक्सपेक्टेड था, एक्सपेक्टेड का मतलब है एज ग्रुप. अब सपोज अगर आई एम 50 इयर्स ओल्ड, तो 50 इयर्स का क्या क्या रेंज में वैल्यूज आ सकती हैं, और एक 18 इयर्स की क्या आ सकती हैं, या एक 70 इयर्स की क्या आ सकती हैं, ये क्लिनिशियन को पता है. अगर उससे वेरी कर रही हैं तो वो किसी बीमारी के कारण कर रही है या बिकॉज कोई कंडीशन थी इसलिए कर रही है, वो फिजियोलॉजिकल हो गया. जिसमें कि आपकी प्रेगनेंसी हो सकती है, स्मोकिंग हो सकती है, स्ट्रेस रिलेटेड हो सकता है, एक्सरसाइज के बाद आपने एकदम सैंपल दे दिया, वो सब चीजें जो होती हैं उससे हो जाती हैं. फास्टिंग है लेकिन आप खाना खा के आपने सैंपल दे दिया, तो वो सब तो चीजें फिजियोलॉजिकल मतलब पैथोलॉजिक मतलब खैर फास्टिंग वाला तो पैथोलॉजिकल में आएगा, मतलब कंट्रोल में आएगा, लेकिन फिर भी किसी ने अनलोइंगली कर लिया। व्हेन इट कम्स टू नॉन फिजियोलॉजिकल का मतलब है जो हमारे से है, जैसे कि आपने फास्टिंग पेशेंट था, उसने फास्टिंग लिया, फिर नाश्ता भी कर लिया, फिर आपने सैंपल लिया, आपने उसको एक्सप्लेन नहीं किया, आपके कंट्रोल में था, आप उसको एरर को कंट्रोल कर सकते थे। आपने यूरिन सैंपल लिया, आपने मिड स्ट्रीम एक्सप्लेन नहीं किया, पेशेंट ने ऐसे यूरिन सैंपल दे दिया, कंटामिनेशन आ गया, हम उसको कंट्रोल कर सकते थे। ये सारे आपके कंट्रोल में है। आपने टूनिके ज्यादा देर टाई कर दिया, आपने क्या कहते हैं प्रिक ऐसा करा कि हिमोलिसिस हो गई, हिमोलिस सैंपल हिमोलाइज हो गया, आपने साइट को क्लीन किया, आपने उसको ड्राई नहीं होने दिया, आपने पहले प्रिक कर दिया, बिकॉज ऑफ द आइसोप्रोपिल अल्कोहल समटाइम्स हिमोलिसिस माइट हैपन। एक दूसरी चीज ये कि जब भी आप लैब में काम करते हैं, कोशिश करिए एक फिश बोन बनाने की, जहां मैंने बिकॉज ऑफ इंटरेस्ट ऑफ टाइम आई डिड नॉट टेक दैट। आप जो क्वालिटी इंप्रूवमेंट की भी हर चीज की एक फिश बोन बनती है। अगर कोई लोग फिश खाते हैं, उन्होंने देखा होगा फिश की ऐसी बोन होती है, उसके दोनों तरफ कांटे निकले होते हैं, तो दैट इज कॉल्ड अ फिश बोन अरेंजमेंट, कि कोई भी चीज के क्या क्या कारण हो सकते हैं। तो आप कभी भी कोई चीज देख रहे हैं, उसके सारे कारण लिखिए, फिर एक एक करके एक्सक्लूड करिए कि ये हो सकता था, ये नहीं हो सकता था इस कंडीशन में। तो वो सारे आपके आपके कंट्रोल में है। आपने जो है पेशेंट को क्या कहते हैं, अब जैसे आपके टाइमिंग होते हैं, प्रोलैक्टिन सैंपल है, प्रोलैक्टिन का टाइम सैंपल होता है 20 मिनट्स के डिफरेंस में, डिपेंड करता है, कुछ लोग फर्क करते हैं। आपने आगे पीछे ले लिया, आपने उसको मिक्स, अब मिक्सिंग है, मैंने अभी वो सब डिटेल में नहीं गई क्योंकि बहुत बेसिक्स ऑफ सैंपल कलेक्शन है। आपको सैंपल मिक्स कैसे करना है, आपको ये मूवमेंट आपका एक मूवमेंट होता है, आप ऐसे ऐसे करके कर रहे हैं, आप कैसे कर रहे हैं, विग्रसली मिक्स कर रहे हैं, तो ये आपके कंट्रोल में है ना। आपने वेरिएबल कर दिया क्योंकि आपकी गलती से वो वेरिएबल आया, वो एरर आया, तो वो आपका कंट्रोल में नॉन फिजियोलॉजिकल एरर है। आई थिंक आई एम एबल टू एक्सप्लेन।
Yeah. There's another one saying in pre-analytical errors, the right test choice. So she wants to understand, Ms. Muskan Goswami wants to understand.
So right टेस्ट चॉइस में क्या है कि ये अभी फ्लेबोटमिस्ट या लैब के इतने अंडर में नहीं है, बट क्योंकि द होल सिनेरियो इज बीइंग लिंक्ड। देखो हम कभी भी रिपोर्टिंग करते हैं, आज की डेट में भी वी हैव वेरी लेस डेटा बिकॉज वी आर नॉट डायरेक्टली गेटिंग इट लिंक टू द पेशेंट आउटकम। तो अभी क्या बहुत ज्यादा स्टडीज चल रही हैं जिसमें कि प्री एनालिटिकल, ऐसे मैंने आपको बताया, प्री एनालिटिकल, ट्रू प्री एनालिटिकल में डिवाइड कर दिया, इसी तरह पोस्ट एनालिटिकल को भी स्टडी कर रहे हैं। जब प्री एनालिटिकल को स्टडी करते हैं तो राइट टेस्ट, राइट चॉइस इज बिकमिंग वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट, जो एटलीस्ट कई बार क्लिनिशियल के लेवल पे भी होती है। मैं एक बहुत छोटा सा एग्जांपल देती हूँ, कहीं टिश्यू की बायोप्सी हुई, आपको कल्चर करने के लिए सैंपल भेज दिया, लेकिन सैंपल भेजा फॉर्मलिन में, आप कल्चर नहीं कर पाएंगे। सो मतलब बेसिकली वो उस तरह से है कि उस टाइम पे उसका क्या टेस्ट, राइट चॉइस हमने करी नहीं करी, वो पेशेंट के आउटकम को इम्पैक्ट कर रहा है। देयर इज लॉट ऑफ स्टिल स्टडीज गोइंग ऑन, नॉट डायरेक्टली इम्पैक्टिंग द फ्लेबोटमिस्ट और द फ्रंट एंड राइट नाउ, बट दैट इज बीइंग कंसिडर्ड अ वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट कॉज ऑफ द एरर।
Absolutely. I mean, getting to the root cause may be the source of the.
क्योंकि कई बार हो जाता है कि उन्होंने क्या टेस्ट लिखा, क्या टेस्ट सोचा, क्या बोला, एंटर क्या हो गया। कई आप देखेंगे देयर आर आर्टिकल्स की जो मिलते जुलते शब्द की प्रोनाउंसिएशन है, कि टेस्ट सिमिलर लगते हैं और बोला कुछ लिखा कुछ, या लिखा कुछ है वो लिखते वक्त समझ में नहीं आया और वहां पे कोई और टेस्ट हो गया। तो कई बार ये इसलिए मैटर करता है क्योंकि ये सब चीजें मेजर होती हैं पेशेंट के आउटकम से। अगर गलत टेस्ट हुआ, टेस्ट करने में टाइम लगा, रिपोर्ट डॉक्टर के पास गई, तब तो नहीं तो टेस्ट गलत था, दोबारा कुछ और होगा, तो आप ये देखिए पेशेंट के ट्रीटमेंट में कितना डिले हो रहा है। सो दैट्स वाई ये बहुत ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है। तो इट्स बीन अगेन एंड अगेन सेड, तो इसीलिए वो लोग कहते हैं कि कई बार जो पैथोलॉजिस्ट हैं उनको भी मीटिंग्स करनी चाहिए, कॉन्फ्रेंसेस करने चाहिए, डिस्कशंस करने चाहिए, टू गाइड एंड डिस्कस विद द क्लिनिशियन इन व्हाट कंडीशंस, व्हाट रिपोर्ट्स, व्हाट इज द ट्रेंड गोइंग, व्हाट विल बी मोर इफेक्टिव, सो दैट यू नो यू आर हैविंग द राइट चॉइसेस एंड द राइट टेस्ट एट द राइट टाइम।
Right. This is the last question. We'll like to post it to you. So I think it could be very common with new technicians. So he writes that being a student, we are not being trained enough during our college days, and when we want to do practice on our own in laboratories nearby, then people won't let us. And when we finish our studies, everyone wants technicians with experience. So how to tackle this, how to address
so yeah, this is something very difficult, but I will tell you that the courses that we are running and what we are promoting is there is a big component, and that's why in the skilling ecosystem we are putting on the job training. So basically what is happening is that you study theory and you study practical for a limited period of time, and on job training period is defined. So on the job, that training organization need to have MOU with few hospitals or labs where they are going to send their kids for on the job training. So when those students are being sent to those institutions for on the job training, then they need to learn and they will be given chance to practice. And in the time when you're learning, there are a lot of, dummy arms and, dummy systems. Their institutions could make you practice in that so that you are able to do it confidently, and then you can prick a patient. So that's the, उसी तरीके से हो सकता है कि डमी आर्म्स वगैरह में आप प्रैक्टिस करिए और फिर आप पेशेंट्स के साथ करिए. लेकिन कई जगह अभी जो इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, ऑन जॉब ट्रेनिंग पे बहुत ज्यादा एम्फेसिस है. ऑन जॉब ट्रेनिंग का मतलब ही ये होता है कि आप थ्योरी प्रैक्टिकल पढ़ने के बाद लाइव सिचुएशंस में जाकर के साइट पे काम कर रहे हैं, और वहां पे क्योंकि लीगल डॉक्यूमेंट होता है, MOU होता है, तो ट्रेनिंग्स को मौका दिया जाता है.
So I think everyone who is listening and getting lots of thank you messages in the chat box. So everyone, thanks you so much for the talk today, ma'am. On behalf of Polymedicure, on behalf of all the participants who took out time to log into the session today, I thank you. My heartfelt thanks to you.